Hello, my friend. How are you doing today? It's great to see you. If you're new here, my name is McDuffee. I'm a composer, music producer, and artist. Today, we have kind of a special video. I should say, hello, students. The questions for today's little interview are provided and asked by the students at the University of Rochester in New York as part of their Video Games as Interactive Storytelling class. A specific thank you to Dr. Joseph Loporcaro, forgive me if I pronounced your last name incorrectly, for providing me this opportunity.
What is your background in music?
I started playing piano and taking private singing lessons, all from the tender age of 8. Fell in love with music immediately. It's been part of my entire life. I did lots of studies of classical music, jazz. I was in jazz choirs, more traditional classical choirs, show choir, musical theater, anything music I could get my hands on. Once I got to the university level, I really kind of doubled down and got a film scoring degree with a minor in electronic music, and then furthered my studies at the Berklee College of Music, specifically for orchestration for film and TV.
How did you first get involved in composing music for video games?
So fresh out of college, I had in my mind that I was going to score films. That's what I studied. That's what was going to happen. And a few years into my post-college life, I was kind of feeling like the opportunities weren't there as quickly as I wanted them to be. And video games were something that I always thought about doing, but it took a little while for me to start pivoting my focus into video game scoring. And I really started that focus by attending things like GDC, which is the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco, and expanding my network with industry folk there.
How did you get connected to the River City Girls projects?
This question comes up quite a bit, and I will say the same thing every time, which is that this is my networking miracle. I was part of a group called the Materia Collective, which was a group of people who love video games, who love video game music, and were composers, arrangers, orchestrators, instrumentalists, what have you. One of these composers, a man by the name of Dale North, really awesome guy, fantastic musician. He had a long-standing friendship with people at WayForward. When he and some of the game's directors were in conversation, they asked him if he knew anybody with a synth pop sensibility. And Dale mentioned me. And at that point in time, I didn't even know Dale knew who I was. So thanks again, Dale. You did some fantastic things for me without even knowing it.
Any piece of advice for people who want to get into creating video game music?
Advice. I have it. If I had to boil it down. Hone your craft by producing and composing every day if you possibly can. Just get really good at what you want to do. Secondly, network. Network your butt off. Meet people, talk to people, even people you don't think are going to have a direct connection to the industry. Talk to them. Insert what you do, what you want to do into conversation where it makes sense. Don't try to shoehorn anything. It doesn't feel natural. Attend things like GDC, game developer meetups, find groups online, just wherever you can. Talk to people. And thirdly, maybe even most importantly, persistence. You have to be persistent. You have to want it really badly and work towards it all the time.
Never give up. Never surrender.
What's your thought process when making music? What do you think of first or prioritize?
Typically, when I start a game project or a client project, I am given a brief or a set of pieces of reference material to analyze. So that will inform the tone, the style, the instrumentation, the energy level, that kind of thing. And just as a personal choice, I often start with drums and bass because I feel like that gives me a really good foundation from which to work. It sets the pacing, it sets the vibe, and I can build from there.
I'm always curious about how someone starts their art form. Do you also look for references or draw in inspiration from certain people?
I do. Like I mentioned in the previous answer, I'm often given reference material, be it character art, gameplay footage, other pieces of music to listen to. So that informs where I go directionally when I'm composing for a game score. For my own artist work, however, I actually keep a running spreadsheet of artists, bands, artwork, films, specific things from movies and TV shows that inspire me or at least start that that little spark of like, oh yeah, that's really cool. I want to use the vibe there.
Where do you get inspiration from?
I get inspiration from everywhere. Music, TV, movies, landscapes, nature. Yeah, pretty much anywhere and everywhere.
What inspires you the most lately during your music creation process?
Lately, I have been on a sort of dark EDM, dark club vibe in the artists that I've been discovering. And by listening to that type of music, I now want to dive into creating more of it myself. And I'm finding that some different synths maybe I'll pull in, or I need different mixing techniques to achieve that sound. So that's been my kick lately.
Your compositions from River City Girls 2 seamlessly blend multiple genres, enhancing the game's energetic atmosphere. Could you share your approach to integrating these diverse musical styles into a cohesive soundtrack that aligns with the game's dynamic environments?
What a well-worded question. Thank you. Yeah, River City 2 specifically. It was the case on the first game as well, but more so on the sequel because we had already established a universe and a vibe. So for the second game score, I was also given, like you say, a lot of different genres to work with and to use as reference. You could always try genre blending. Genre blending?
Genre blending?
Yes, blending genres. This is not a hard concept. Genre blending. The way I found to keep everything coherent and cohesive was in the energy level. A lot of the tracks, if not all of them, are very energetic. They're very up-tempo, high-paced, fun, get your blood pumping. I used a lot of the same drum kits, a lot of the same synth basses, and from there, I could then add those jazz elements or add those orchestral elements. But as long as the foundational elements were there, the drums, the bass, and the tempo, it all works together.
How did you decide on the mix of musical styles to match the game's vibe?
So a lot of that was prescribed from the development team. They already had a very, very specific vision, obviously drawing influence from my previous score into the score for this one. But the games director, my homeboy, Bannon Rudis, he had a very specific vision, especially for the bosses and the sort of energy and vibes that they had individually as characters. I'm not sure where he got his ideas from, but he already had those visions when he hired me for this one.
The River City Girls 2 soundtrack has such a diverse range of styles that perfectly capture the game's unique vibe. Can you talk about your creative approach to composing for such a high-energy, retro-inspired world?
I find that just diving right in is my approach. Again, with the reference from my previous soundtrack, just the pacing, the energy level, the types of basses and synths and drums that I was using pulled forward into this sequel, that really helped. And other than that, drums and bass, instrument choices, keeping that energy up.
Does your creative process change at all when working on multiple projects that have different goals or needs?
Sometimes I have to kind of flip a little switch in my brain.
Okay,
If I'm deep in one project and then I switch gears into a different one, this is one of those things that's just sort of amorphous and is very hard to explain or put into words in any capacity. The creative process for me doesn't change all that much. I am really good about scheduling, so it keeps me from flip-flopping between too many different projects and needs and deliverables too often, which keeps it actually quite structured. I think that helps. I'm just gonna roll with that. Keeping things organized is how my creative process is able to stay grounded.
How does your process change when you have to write an isolated song compared to an entire soundtrack?
Honestly, it doesn't change a ton. The only thing that maybe would change is that, say I have a one-off track versus 3 or 4 for a specific area of the game. With the individual track, I want to infuse it as much with the tone, the vibe, the direction that I was given as possible to really like make it as thick with those elements as I can. Whereas if I have a few tracks in a very similar vein or for a similar project, area of a game, what have you, I can play a little bit more. There's a little bit more breathing room where all of those tracks serve a purpose as a unit rather than just one track by itself that has to serve the same purpose.
What was the criteria that determined which sections of the game got a vocal track and which didn't?
That was a creative choice, I assume, by Bannon or people on the team. Bannon really wanted all of the bosses to have basically their own character songs in this sequel, which I thought was a really fun change from the first game.
And then the second part to this question is, how did including lyrics influence the arrangement of the song?
Yeah, that's always a consideration when I'm starting a track, is if it's a vocal track or it's not. Leaving room for the vocal to take the front and center melodies is always the consideration which I have to have. Meaning that things that would normally be played on different synth parts or different orchestral instruments would then go to the vocal. And so those other instruments have to play a more subdued role. There's a little bit more free form with an instrumental, and this is not to say that all vocal songs have to have the typical pop verse chorus structure. In this case, they do, simply because that just felt right.
What's your lyrical process?
My lyrical process in the context of River City Girls 2, as I mentioned before, the vocal tracks were all kind of mini character themes for the different bosses of each level. Their perspectives, their character backstories, their energy, even their color palettes, and just like how they appeared on the page or on the screen in front of me dictated how I was going to essentially sing in their voice. So they all kind of have different motives, they all have different goals and things that they want. Obviously, these are bosses, they're villains, right, in this story, so they were all very egocentric and had their own needs in mind. So lyrically, I tried to capture that just with using their stories.
The songs in RCG2 seem to be sung from the perspective of different characters. How do you match the character's personality to the song in the writing process?
Yeah, I'm gonna just refer to the previous answer. I was given character backstories, artwork, their motivations and their goals, kind of where they're coming from, their headspace, so that informed their stories and where I started from, lyrically speaking.
And then the second part of this question is, are there any specific genres or rhythms, etc., that you tend to use for specific characters or character types?
So it really depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. A really good example of this is Primo's boss fight. Obviously, he is of Latin descent. He has a cooking show. He's like all about spicy peppers. So that really informed where I started and what instrumentation choices that I made. You know, things like maracas. I even threw in mariachi shouts because those were hilarious to me and Bannon gave me the okay. So I'm really excited that those got in there. Incorporating more Latin rhythms and instruments. Primo is definitely the one where you can tell the most. Oh, and Spanish guitar, of course.
How did you think about larger scale music development while composing the soundtrack for River City Girls 2?
I think, again, it just kind of comes down to using the same instrument palette throughout the soundtrack. Also very similar tempos. That just brings a cohesion and allowed me to play and experiment on individual tracks, but it keeps everything cohesive and it kept the overall musical idea in the same realm.
Did you find yourself changing the music that related to some character, place, or moment after the story element changed in some way during the game's narrative?
Okay, well this is where y'all are gonna catch me because I have not played any of this game. So
you played the first one.
I played some of the first one. I haven't played River City 2, so I can't really speak to that. I don't even know certain story beats or the overarching story of this game, except, you know, I know character motivations and backstories, but as an overarching story, I am in the dark. Oh no, you caught me. As it related to me and just the specific music stuff that I was doing, I really only remember seeing character art and character descriptions, stuff like that.
I've been exploring how music shapes player experience during my video game class. How did you approach composing music for River City Girls 2 to enhance the game's atmosphere and player immersion, especially with its mix of action and humor?
Well, the humor element I left to the voice actors and the writers and the directors to get those punchlines and those those one-liners across. For me, the lyrics are humorous, probably because the characters were over-exaggerated and kind of ridiculous and over the top in the best ways. So yeah, bringing their voices forward in a humorous way. I don't know, it's just something that I had in my mind when I was working on this, and it luckily came across. So yeah, I mean, my approach was exactly that, combining action by way of tempo and instrument choices, and also humor by way of instrument choices. Things like the mariachi shouts that I mentioned earlier. Those were hilarious to me. Also in the lyrics, keeping things really sassy.
In River City Girls, music and audio plays a big role in driving the action forward. Did you use any specific techniques or approaches to pace the music to complement and enhance the narrative experience?
So yeah, energy level. All of these tracks are very up-tempo and exciting and blood-pumping.
How did you decide how much characterization is shown for each character in their song, in regards to lyrics, song and genre style, vocal style, etc.? In other words, how did you balance revealing information about the characters via song versus spoiling things the gameplay or dialogue will eventually reveal?
I'm glad you clarified that question towards the latter half. That's a great question. I, again, went from what I was given of the characters' motivations and their backstory, and tried to capture their essence without being extremely specific. So, for example, Ken, I think he's the first boss that you encounter. He's an egomaniac, so the song became I'm Better Than You. Very simple, but there's nothing extremely specific about his motivations other than he thinks he's hot stuff.
How do you get ideas for implementing plot points or character motifs in your song for the game? Were some of those elements insisted on by the developers?
I don't think anything was insisted upon. It was more like, here's a collection of reference things, be it art, music, what have you, to inspire. And I went from there. There was nothing that was like, no, you can't say this, or you have to say this, or you have to incorporate this. They liked what I delivered, so it worked out.
When creating the soundtrack for River City Girls 2, how did you balance introducing your own ideas and referencing the musical styles of older River City games?
Obviously, my soundtrack for River City Girls 1 influenced the overall vibe of River City Girls 2. Prior to River City Girls 1, obviously, River City Ransom had its own collection of tunes, soundtrack, and for River City Girls 1, WayForward had requested certain songs from River City Ransom to be sort of updated and synth-popified. Similarly, for River City Girls 2, specific songs were requested from River City Ransom or the old Kunio-kun series. They're like, hey, by the way, we really want this track to have a fresh, remix to fit into this score. So in those cases, I kind of used the sound palette that I've been using for the rest of the soundtrack, but the melodies are really what carried over.
Did the technological limitations of the older game's sound influence the music you created for this game?
No. I try to use some retro-sounding synths in video game music in general, specifically when it's sort of a pixel style like these games are. But since I don't have any technical limitations, that's great, and I don't let it hinder me in any way. Like I said previously, it's really the melodies that carry over and bring the nostalgia forward.
How did you balance staying true to the beat-em-up genre while bringing in your own musical identity?
Beat-em-ups to me are fast-paced, energetic, blood-pumping, kind of aggressive. So things, like I say, drums, bass, certain synth choices, tempo, obviously, that keeps the action going. And then my own musical identity, I like to be extremely melodic most of the time. I was greatly influenced by super melodically rich artists like Depeche Mode or film composers like Danny Elfman, John Williams. So take all the action stuff and plop a bunch of melodic stuff on top of it.
When working on River City Girls, how did you balance retro and modern elements in the soundtrack to ensure both vibes were distinct yet cohesive in the game?
I never had a deliberate thought to do that. I just kind of do what comes to me, and it works.
I'm going to give you a little advice. There's a force in the universe that makes things happen. And all you have to do is get in touch with it. Stop thinking. Let things happen. And be the ball.
What was it like working with an established studio like WayForward? Did you have a lot of creative control in what you made, or did they ask you to work towards a certain sound or vibe?
Firstly, it was fantastic and continues to be fantastic to work with WayForward. They are awesome. From the very first project that we worked on, River City Girls 1, they gave me quite a bit of creative freedom, actually. I had reference material. I had sort of a collection of tracks for general mood and instrumentation. And once I delivered the first track, it was a vocal track, to sort of see if I was on the right track, and they loved it. They kind of trusted me from that point forward and were like, okay, this is what we need you to deliver. And I just sort of batched everything and sent them tracks, and they were like, yep, cool. Oh, change that one synth there. Okay, now keep going. Yep. So I had, within the bounds of the vision that they had, I had a lot of creative freedom.
Did you work more individually throughout this process, or did you work more closely with the writing and directing teams?
I feel like since we had established a really good working relationship prior to River City 2, it was a little bit even more freeform, where it's like, okay, this is what we want, go do the thing.
Go out to the command ship and await my orders.
Yes, my master.
And I did the thing.
Do you think there will be an RCG3 ?
Do I think there will be?
Do you own the music you make for video games, or does the video game company?
It really just depends how big the studio is, what they're willing to negotiate with me. I love to keep all of the rights to my music when possible, but sometimes that's not possible, and I totally get that from a larger studio or a business perspective. In the case of River City, WayForward was kind enough to let me have soundtrack rights specifically just to sell it for listening purposes. So they own everything. I created it for them as a bespoke custom project, and I can then sell the soundtrack or stream it on services like Spotify.
What hardware software do you use most?
Without getting too nitty-gritty into the tech specs of all these different things, I am running a Mac Mini. I am running Cubase. That is my audio workstation of choice. Got some nice keyboards around here. But yeah, most of the stuff I do is what they say as in the box, which is in my computer, VST plugins.
What is your favorite instrument? Is it your voice?
Oh, that's so hard to choose. It's like when people ask me, what's your favorite track on your new album? But just off the cuff, I would say my favorite instrument to play is my voice, because I have the most training and the most experience with it. Therefore, it is easy and becomes fun. When things are too hard, they're not fun. But my favorite instrument to listen to might be the cello.
Considering sound design involves the production and adaptation of multiple sound layers, how do you reach the mixing decision about sounds and layers for River City Girls?
Well, it comes down to arrangement, I think. The trick that I am always conscious of is not having too many things going on or having too many layers.
Too many notes, Your Majesty.
Exactly. Very well put. Too many notes.
When you can achieve the same effect with less layers, it's usually a good decision. On every piece I work on, regardless of where it's going, I do try to keep in mind sonically how rich or deficient it is and try to find that sweet spot. There's no one formula for any given track. And for River City 2, no different. It's just like, does this sound right? How many layers are there? Does it matter if it sounds right? No.
How is the creative approach of video game music different from that of other mediums, TV, film, theater, music in general?
Two things come to mind. From the technical standpoint, it is composing in layers and loops. So thinking about the sections of a track, where the loop point is, how it's going to seamlessly transition from one spot to another. So keeping that in mind. Also dynamic layering, where a gameplay action will trigger something and then, it'll musically come in to denote that happening. So those are things that I do not have to think about when writing for anything else besides games. And in a similar vein, but less technical, is the fact that people will likely be sitting with your music for a very, very long period of time in any specific area. With film, it's very linear. It's like, here's the scene start, here's the end. That is the amount of music you need for that chunk. Whereas in a game, you don't know how long this person is going to be trying to figure out this puzzle or working on this combat thing. So that's a very important consideration, is how to keep the gameplay enhanced and not detract.
Since you've worked on both film and video game audio, did your creative process for River City Girls differ from other projects? Are there unique aspects to creating game audio that stand out to you?
Right. I kind of just covered this. Specific to games is working dynamically, adding elements in, taking them away, working in loops.
Do you play a lot of video games?
A lot is probably very subjective. I probably don't play a lot of video games by most people's standards. I go in phases. Sometimes I will be like really deep into a game and in a gaming mindset, and then I'll just queue up a bunch of games that I'll play. And then for some unknown reason, a couple months will go by and I won't have played a single thing for like months and months at a time. So it goes in waves.
What are some of your all-time favorites?
As I mentioned earlier, I am a big 64 fan, so the first few games that I really got into are still some of my favorites. Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Banjo-Kazooie, Mario 64, all Nintendo 64 titles. I am a very big fan of Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. On the indie front, I really, really love Subnautica, one of my favorites. I also really like the weird, spooky stuff that Bloober Team does. So Layers of Fear and The Medium. That was really cool. I like really trippy puzzle games like Viewfinder. There's a lot out there.
What's your favorite song from RCG2 that you worked on?
These types of questions are so difficult.
I know my favorite from RC2.
Let's hear it. What's your favorite?
It's the end credits, the Couch Potato song.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Nobody ever mentions that song.
That's my favorite song on the soundtrack.
That makes you the first person. My personal favorite. Okay, just first impulse, gut reaction is Blair's boss fight, which is the electro swing track. It was a challenge. It wasn't that much of a challenge because I knew what I needed to do, but arranging for orchestra and making sampled instruments sound as realistic as possible always adds an extra layer of time to the production, but that one's so much fun.
Who is your favorite character from RCG and why?
My favorite character, just off the top of my head, would have to be Blair. Yeah, I kind of identify with her. I live in the woods. She lives in the woods. I'm a little bit of a hermit sometimes, which is why most of my days are spent in a dark studio working on my music. She's got sort of a cat-looking creature. I have two cat-looking creatures. Yeah, I fully identify with her.
What's your favorite track from any game you've gotten to work on?
Ooh, my collective game works. Oh man, that's rough. I'm gonna go with a fan favorite, which is The Hunt from River City Girls 1. I hear things now in that track that I would have done differently from a technical and mix perspective, but as a song, I feel like it just speaks to a lot of different people for different reasons, so.
What's your favorite video game soundtrack and why?
It's so hard. It's like asking me to pick a favorite film score. So many good things. I'll just, off the top of my head, I'll go with Oblivion. It just so perfectly fits the world. It so perfectly fits the Elder Scrolls universe. It's both attention-getting for how just delicious it is, but also it doesn't detract at all. It completely enhances the gameplay experience. Congratulations if you made it into the video this far. I've loved answering the questions from the students at Rochester University. I thank you again for this opportunity. It's been an absolute pleasure to answer your questions. If any of you are thinking of becoming composers for video games, I wish you the very best of luck on your journey, or even just in music in general. Thanks for watching, and it would really help me out if you liked and subscribed to my channel. I post a lot of tasty stuff on Instagram. Please follow me there, and check out some of my tunes on Spotify and Bandcamp.